All right, I have seen it. Let's talk about Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I'm not telling you anything. Go see this movie. Okay. We all just got a hell of a Christmas present this year, and that is something that only happens about every 50 years, and that is a remake of Nosferatu. Now, obviously there are going to be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, please turn this off and go check this out, because as a vampire fan, this is the kind of movie that only comes around once in a while. Having said all that, I'm not going to do a review of it here, because there are lots of YouTubers out there who are reviewing this movie right now. I leave it to the film crit experts to break it all down, cultural impact, all that sort of thing. But what I wanted to talk about is what we usually talk about on this channel, and that is what we can learn as storytellers. And specifically, what we can learn from Robert Eggers' Nosferatu as creators. First of all, I think probably the most important thing to address is that this is a remake. But it's more than that, because as you are probably aware as somebody who's watching this channel, Nosferatu in itself is an adaptation of the book Dracula. And I did a video 2 years ago where I interviewed David J. Skal, who was one of the greatest horror film historians, where we talked about Nosferatu and how exactly the story of that movie getting made and how it was an adaptation of Dracula and how we almost lost that film forever. So if you want to watch that and really find out about the original source material, you can find that here. But in a nutshell, Nosferatu, the silent film, came out in 1922. And for unknown reasons, a lot of it is different than the book Dracula. All of the character names have been changed. The location has been changed from England to Germany. The time period has been changed. It takes place some 50 years earlier than what Dracula did. There is a huge plague motif in it. There is the character of Count Orlok looks very different than the description of Dracula in the book. And most importantly, the ending. Count Orlok is destroyed by the coming rays of dawn at the end of the movie, which was not something that was in Dracula or vampire myth, folklore, previous books, short stories, anything like that. So Nosferatu has become sort of like its own thing. And you can find all of the DNA of Dracula in it, absolutely, especially in the first half of the film. But it does diverge, and Count Orlok becomes his own character. So the question in doing this remake must have been, how do I retain what is unique about Nosferatu that is different than Dracula? But bearing in mind that Nosferatu was a silent film, and so what do I do with this in order to make it into a modern day 2-hour film that works as a horror movie that modern audiences will be scared by? And so what we find is that really most of what was in Nosferatu, the original, is in this film. All of the characters are not only named the same, but also look the same. The setting feels the same. It has a very German feel to it. And the character of Count Orlok is very reminiscent of the original movie. And But there was this, there's also a lot of new stuff in this film. And in sort of filling out the cracks, Robert Eggers obviously returned to Stoker's novel to sort of add extra stuff in. What it feels like is that in any situation, if there's a choice between using something from the original film Nosferatu or using something from the book Dracula, the first thing to always be chosen was, if it was in the film Nosferatu, it's going in this film, and that sort of is more important than anything else. If it wasn't in Nosferatu, but it was in Dracula, then we can kind of lift that and sort of bring it in and sort of bolster what's here. And so you get some really interesting stuff, like the mention of the Scholomance in this Nosferatu movie, which was not in the original one. That element from the book Dracula that rarely ever gets used, the fact that Dracula studied at the Scholomance, really takes a front seat in this film for sort of a very important plot moment. In the original film, there was sort of the narrative tool of the Book of the Vampires, which Hutter is reading from, and that's where he learns about what Nosferatu is, and the fact that the only way to kill Nosferatu is for a maiden to give herself willingly to the creature and hold him, drinking her blood until the sun comes up, at which point he cannot get back to his coffin in time, and he will be destroyed. But that's, what worked in a silent film at the time is not anywhere near as creepy. And so there was this added element of a Scholomance book of secrets that is then found by Willem Dafoe's character, and all the information that needed to be garnered through research by the characters is found in that. And let's talk for just a second about the character of Willem Dafoe's Professor Alban, who is not in the original movie, sort of. There is a Professor Bulwer who is obviously the same character, but he's only seen very briefly in the original film, at least in the footage that survived. But Robert Eggers clearly wanted an expert, like a vampire expert, a Van Helsing character, to show up in this movie. And he also, assumedly, because this movie is very heavy, wanted for there to be some comic relief. And Willem Dafoe is an excellent actor to put in that role. So there was no real Van Helsing character in Nosferatu, but we have him in this movie, and he really adds and helps to drive the plot along. So that sort of synthesis between the priority of the material in the original movie and the sort of peppering in of elements from the book Dracula makes for a really good symbiosis. And that is excellent adaptation. Now, let's talk about the other thing that is extremely obvious, having watched this movie, and that is mood. Mood is everything in this film. It's everything from the color palette, which is very monotone in any given scene. It's like you pick a color, and that color is the drabbest version of that color, or just the coolest, bleakest, deadest version of that color throughout any particular scene. There is incredible work done with shadows, which is, it's a vampire movie with shadows. Yes, absolutely. This is the ultimate vampire movie with shadows. And the shadows are part of the storytelling in it. Not only for revealing Count Orlok as he emerges from the shadows, and not only showing him moving as a shadow, but also in the incredible framing of elements. And it really isn't hyperbole to say that you could just pause on any frame of this movie, and you would have basically an image that would be worth framing and putting on your wall. But that mood makes everything in the movie feel so heavy and just oppressive, and there's this feeling of not being able to breathe that is uniform between the characters, the main characters, who are descending more and more into the nightmare of Count Orlok's coming to Wisburg, but also Orlok himself. It has this raspy breath that just makes everything feel so heavy and congested. And when you have these amazing scenes where you have like a fireplace that is the only thing that's lighting up a room, but they've also fogged the shit out of the set. So you just feel like you're peering through like heavily, like your glasses are just like fogged over and you're only seeing like the light and the halo of it and shadows moving through. It is incredibly thick, the mood of this film. And that is the thing that really pulls it out of any other vampire adaptation or vampire story that you've probably ever seen, and really makes it its own thing. Just done expertly well. And that is bolstered by the sound design. This was, I mean, like, I was sitting in that theater and I was just in awe of the sound design for this thing. Like, every time Count Orlok takes a step, just a single footstep, it just sounds like a Tyrannosaurus footstep. Like, it's just there, the weight of his character is immense. And when he is sucking the blood from someone, like, it full on sounds like someone just going to town on an entire cantaloupe. Like, it is ridiculous and nasty and visceral, and that's throughout the entire film. Like, you could completely turn off the visuals and just have this amazing feast of sound that you could listen to. There's also an addition in here of traditional Eastern European vampire folklore. When we find the scene where Hutter is watching the locals find the grave of a vampire and then staking it through the heart, and essentially giving him the knowledge that he needs to then try and kill Orlok in Orlok's crypt later on. But that's something that wasn't in the original Nosferatu. It was not really in the original book Dracula either. You definitely had locals who were superstitious, who were warning the Harker or Hutter character not to go to the castle. But you never actually saw a vampire killed or unearthed or discover anything like that prior to the main character meeting the Count. And that is an excellent way to not only set up the audience, but also to set up the main character. We all know we're watching a vampire movie now. There's not that surprise that an audience would have had in watching the Bela Lugosi movie in the 30s, or for that matter, Nosferatu in the 20s, or reading Dracula in the 1890s. So foreshadowing with some actual folklore, especially the stuff that is not typical pop culture common knowledge, adds an excellent flavor to the whole thing. Another thing that I wanted to bring up that this adaptation does an excellent job with is the idea of what we will call activating the heroine. So when you watch the original Nosferatu, arguably the hero of the story is Ellen, who is played by Lily Rose Depp in this movie. And she is the one who does not want, she has sort of like a supernatural ability to sort of like see far away in her dreams, to sort of know when evil is on the approach, has just sort of a supernatural connection that the rest of us don't. And in the original Nosferatu, it manifests in her knowing that her husband is going off to danger. When he is being terrorized by Orlok in the castle, she is having nightmares, which she can't, which the rest of the household around her can't come to grips with. And she knows when Orlok shows up in her town, and she's the one who is the only one who can do anything about it. And so she makes the choice to sacrifice her own life in order to kill the vampire and save the city. So that's in the original movie. But it was the 1920s. And as a result, even though the character of Ellen is ostensibly the hero, she is a very passive hero until the absolute end of the movie. The active character is Thomas Hutter, who goes to the castle and, the whole thing with the Count, and the other sort of active character is Nock, who is the Renfield type, who is super crazy, who is amazing in this movie, by the way. So in order to make this version of Ellen less of sort of a fretting housewife who's just constantly worrying but unable to do anything because she is a woman, this makes Ellen the active protagonist of the movie. In that, you could argue Orlok is the protagonist. He's the one with an actual plan, and he's trying to do something, and the rest of the characters are the antagonists. They're trying to stop him, which can be said of Dracula as well. But Ellen is the one who has a past with Orlok. And she is the one who is actively fighting against him throughout the entire film on a layer that is in the supernatural, while our gentleman vampire hunters are trying to contend with Orlok in the physical world. She is battling him in the supernatural. She has information that the rest of them don't. Her past choices have had an effect on what is going on in the story. Now, there is a very, and this movie is dark, obviously, has some very dark shit in it, some very dark themes. But potentially one of the darkest is the fact that Ellen goes from, oh my God, my husband is in trouble, I just want him to be safe, to Ellen had an abusive relationship with an older man who is a vampire, who's always much older, but had an abusive relationship that she escaped from and got out of. And she found happiness with her new husband, Thomas Hutter. And then her old boyfriend then begins stalking her and killing everyone around her in order to get her back, because he is singularly obsessed with her. That is a very real thing that very real people in this world have to deal with, and that is aggressively terrifying. Also very triggering, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but that is terrifying subtext to add to a vampire story. And especially when you give the abusive ex-boyfriend the manifold powers of darkness, that seems unstoppable. And So even though we have our strapping male, you know, vampire hunter characters who are attempting to do battle with Count Orlok, they are just as much victims of the Count. But Ellen is the one who is able to swim through all of the accumulated trauma in order to get to the point where she can actually take this motherfucker down. And then does so in the most self-sacrificing way possible. And so what we end up with is this really badass heroine who is not, you know, throwing hand axes and doing backflips and stuff like that, but who is engaging the villain in the most fundamental psychological ways possible. And that is a very compelling example of activating your heroine. And it brings me to my last point, which is that one of the things that this movie does, which is wonderful in a vampire film, is that it never explains everything. You know everything you need to know watching the characters go through this, and you feel everything that you need to know because of the way that it is conveyed through the imagery, the sound design, the acting, the cinematography and the camera choices. The feeling is what's important, even though if you had to explain what exactly the nuances of the contract was that Hutter signed, that Orlok drafted, what it actually means for Ellen and everybody else, you would have no way of really explaining that. But you understand all of it because of the feeling of it. So I guess that is sort of my major chef's kiss to this film, is in you leaving it at the end of the movie. You don't necessarily know what all just happened, but man, you felt all of it, and you are left thinking about it for a long time afterwards. It's been 24 hours now, and I'm still wrapping my brain around this movie. And this is a rare situation where I'm not sure I ever need to see this movie again. I'm not sure I want to see this movie again, because this movie is a sensory assault on you. It is a brutal takedown of you. And it is an amazing experience to go through. But I can't ever have that experience again, watching it a second time. And so I think I just want to live with that feeling that it gave me sitting in that theater with all those people watching this unfold. And that is a rare feeling that I haven't had that many times in my life. So in there, I think, are the lessons, at least that I took away, which are, I think, really good things to think about and wonderful things to salute Robert Eggers for constructing in this amazing, amazing adaptation of Nosferatu. So having said that, I do actually want to hear what you guys thought about it. So let me know in the comments. Otherwise, happy 2025, everybody. Let's make this an amazing year. And boy, whew, what an incredible start we're getting to it. All right, we'll see you next time. Real credits this time.